Philip, you're very welcome to ScaleX Insider Podcast. I'm absolutely delighted and thrilled to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah, look, great to have you on. We've been chatting off air. You know, our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small to medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So what does scaling with purpose mean to you?
Wow. Well, let's start off with an easy one. Jesus. I mean, I've kind of two answers to that. One is, as your business grows, can you continue to grow as a human, as a leader, as a mother, as a father, at the same velocity? Not even at the same, even remotely lagging behind. I meet far too many business owners and work with far too many of them that have allowed their businesses to scale at such a rate that they would say they didn't have the time. They just didn't carve the time. And it was a convenient excuse so they didn't have to examine themselves in some respects. So scaling with purpose is allowing your business to grow. Hopefully it's something that makes a difference in the world, in my personal humble opinion. But if you can grow as a human, as a father, as a mother, as a participant on this earth at even remotely the same scale, that to me is yeah, there's no words. I don't have words. That's the perfect mix to me.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. To share with you, like more than 90% of businesses by volume are small and medium-sized enterprises, and more than 70% of people who work for an SME. So what you've just described in terms of the leader becoming better people has a significant impact on the person, their partners, their teams, their organizations, the community they exist in, society, and the economies as a whole. The SMEs touch every corner of our communities and societies. So
there's one area that I work in. It's not an area I've pursued necessarily. It's an area that I would say organically has come, and that is working in the world of football, what some of your clients might refer to as soccer in certain parts of North America, perhaps. But when I work with soccer players, and I've been very fortunate to work with players that have made it to the highest level, not necessarily because of me, but because of the work we have done and because of who they are as people and their work ethic and their ability to not just work on their physical fitness, their mental fitness and their emotional fitness. And essentially everything off the ice, everything off the field is my business, and everything on the field is their business. And everything from girlfriends, boyfriends, financial struggles, parents, lack of forgiveness, childhood traumas, dysfunctional relationship with money, all of that stuff. And they look at me and they go, how does one part of that, like, for example, my relationship to money, affect my ability? Like, how does that affect my ability at scale? Like, give me a number. And I go, number one is I don't know. Number two is it might be 3%. And they go, well, that's I'm probably better off focusing that time somewhere else. And I go, yeah, 3% in your dysfunctionality to money, 8% on the fact you haven't spoken to your mother for 10 years, 14% on the fact that you haven't addressed some childhood pain and lack of friendship and loneliness as a kid, which is following you to this day. And you're trying to make up for that by becoming famous for the wrong reasons. And then suddenly you're looking at 25, 30, 40% of the pie has been made up by dysfunctionality, things that we can remedy and you can learn to accept, you can learn to work with. That will translate on the pitch significantly, and it always does. And what they always report back, and I have this with entrepreneurs, is just a sense of freedom and peace that has in some cases eluded them for the last 30, 40 or 50 years. And most people think if I work harder, if I make more money, and if I scale at a more ferocious rate, it'll solve it. And it doesn't. It generally doesn't, or almost never does, in my personal experience.
Yeah, I love that insight. And to share with you some of the research, regular listeners to the podcast will have heard me say this and cite the stat before, but lack of ambition of the leader is cited as the single greatest impediment as to why business leaders don't scale. Now, we're almost at 100 episodes. I love unpacking this. And where I've arrived at is essentially lack of ambition is an eloquent way of saying I'm ignorant, so I don't know how, and we provide the know-how. We've created the ScaleX 10 principle framework, so the know-how is there, but the big part of this is actually unchallenged limiting beliefs.
Yeah.
And your work speaks directly to that. So we'll maybe get into some of that today, no doubt. It took me to interview the wonderful Robert Glazer a number of seasons ago, who is all the way across the water, US based, to tell me about the wonderful work that this guy, Philip McKernan from Ireland, was doing. And I was embarrassed to admit that I haven't heard of Philip. Where's Philip from? He says, from Dublin, 90 miles down the road. And then I started to explore what you do, and it's incredible. So, it's this is your wonderful book, One Last Talk. Those who are listening won't be able to see this. I encourage you to go out and get this. It's incredible, because Robert Glazer referred to One Last Talk, and I was hugely curious whenever he referenced it. There's an incredible intro to this book from another US citizen, guy Tucker Max. I'm familiar with Tucker's work. He's the founder of Scribe Media. He says in the opening, I've seen hundreds of business coaches, CEO coaches, life coaches, every sort of coach there is. I think most of them are completely useless. In fact, I think quite a few are destructive. But the first time I saw McKernan coach, I was blown away. He didn't have any of the attributes you would assume a good coach would have, except the most important, his method works. So I want to open up by asking, what is Philip McKernan's method of coaching?
I could bring 50 clients into this room and onto this microphone. I could bring my own wife onto this microphone right now, and I think every one of them might have a slightly different answer. I guess I'm obsessed with truth, and I mean obsessed. I'm obsessed with getting to the very core truth that people carry every single day, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I am obsessed about the pain that people carry that they're not aware of, that holds them back. And I am absolutely even more obsessed by the gifts that people have. It literally brings me to tears. The amount of people that walk this earth every day that are completely disassociated and numbed out from their giftedness in this world. And they go to their graves with many life regrets, which to me are just external life regrets that represent a life that has not been fully lived. And when you can help people move through the dysfunctionalities in their lives that they were aware of and unaware of, what happens is they become more present to themselves and therefore more open to what is just around the corner, what lies just below the skin, what lies just at the end of their nose, or just under their nose, which is sometimes a talk, a speech, a book. It could be something very simple. It could just words as a parent. I'm absolutely so driven at helping people understand who they are, what they're here to do as a man or as a woman, and helping them get clear on that, and then seeing that come to fruition is just, it's indescribable in terms of the wealth it brings to me. I'm not talking monetary wealth or financial wealth in any capacity. So my method to get there is one of immense compassion and immense ruthlessness. If someone comes to me and they want to fight, I will hug them to death. If they come to me and they want to be hugged, I'll often kick them so hard in the ass, or the arse, as we'd say in Ireland, because they need to be woken up, and they do not need another person in this world telling them everything's going to be okay, because sometimes it's not. And the person who has the boxing gloves on and has been fighting for 40 or 50 years, who is so exhausted because all they know is the fight, I drive them nuts initially until they drop the gloves, fall onto the ground, pick themselves up with an exhaustion that they themselves have not even recognized. And now we can begin to do the work so they can fulfill themselves and find work that lights them up. And every time you find work that lights you up, you always light up the world, always. And you inspire your kids around you, so they don't need to be lectured in the future about finding something with purpose and passion, because they get to grow up under the auspice and the energy of a parent that actually lived and breathed every moment of that. So is that a method? I don't know. Is it an obsession? Yes. Is it a passion? It's beyond a passion. And then the methods is the events that we run, the retreats and things like that. They're all designed to help people access certain parts of them, and they're carefully crafted to do that. So that's all I have right now. I mean, that's not rehearsed. That's probably, you wouldn't find that in any other podcast. That's the first time I've said that, the way I've said it.
Wow. You said something in all of that, and I'm going to bring this back. I tend to do this in the podcast to make it super practical right at the outset of that. You said people are walking this planet and they're numbed out of their giftedness. I'm going to bring another stat to bear here. Less than 1% of SME leaders ever achieve scaling. So we can put language around the other 99% to suggest a very tenuous link that in some way they're numb to their giftedness. What questions go to the core of actually unveiling your giftedness? What do we need to be asking ourselves as leaders? Because there's so many leaders out there and they're stuck in the balls of the business. They're stuck in the busyness of day-to-day activity. So what do you urge them to do, number one, and what should they start to question in the context of unveiling their giftedness?
So that in itself is an incredible question. There's a gentleman called Dan Martell. I don't know if you know Dan Martell's work. So he's a gentleman who's based out of Canada. Really good guy. Runs coaching for businesses and business owners in a very different model than yours, in a different industry than yours. Anyway, Dan asked me one day, he said, can you just put a book of questions? He says, you're probably the best question asker I've ever met. Just put all your questions in the book and I'll buy it. I'll pay whatever. It's not the money. I just want the convenience of it. And what I would say to that question, there are questions that I've asked that have stripped people open, that have blown people open, that have allowed them to see something in themselves that they either have been hiding from or unable to access. No doubt. But what I would talk about before that, and again, the first time I've ever brought this up, is the readiness. And readiness doesn't feel like the appropriate word, but I'm going to use it anyway because it's the first thing that comes. Is often people say, give me a question, and I can give you a question in a tube in London. I can give you the same question in a beautiful garden walking around somewhere in Northern Ireland, and maybe the garden behind you. And I can give you the question where you've intentionally made a declaration or a promise to yourself that enough is enough. I'm ready for a change. I'm ready to see what I cannot or do not want to see. And the same question, exactly the same question, can be asked in those three environments. And you will get three answers, but you will also get three answers based on your readiness. The level of readiness and courage that you have to answer and examine the question itself. And most people are not ready. This is a bizarre reality, but this is true. People will often travel thousands of miles and pay thousands of dollars to sit in a room with me for the clarity that they don't actually want. They're just not ready. They want to be seen to be ready. So unfortunately, the same old story of the dog and the nail, you've probably heard this a million times, but I'll share it with your audience. And there's probably 10 versions. But this guy's having a beer with his buddy on a veranda somewhere in the world, and his dog comes up, and the owner's dog curls up and sits right on this exposed nail. And the visitor says, "Hey, Johnny, your dog's lying in a nail." He goes, "Yeah," and he keeps drinking his beer as if he doesn't care. And then 10 minutes later, he goes, "But he's still on the nail. I mean, your dog's on a nail." He goes, "Yeah, he'll move." And the visitor says, "When?" And the owner turns and says, "When the pain is bad enough." And the unfortunate reality is, as we scale, and I think scaling is incredible because we need amazing brands to scale, we need amazing businesses to scale, we need things to scale that have an impact and do good in the world. Because if that doesn't happen, then the other stuff is scaling that's not necessarily helping anybody else. But the challenge is that we often, as we're scaling, we think we have this story, these narratives, both limiting, but also limiting in terms of the size, that when we get to X, then I'll be able to do Y. When I grow my business to this, when I get to the million, when I get to 2 million, when I get to 10 million, when I get to whatever, when I sell the business, then I'll be able to come back and I'll do all the therapy and I'll go to McKernan, one of McKernan's deep dive programs, whatever, and I'll do all this work. And people don't realize that, no, the work needs to be done in conjunction with, or even in advance of. So what I'll finish with is this. I said to you before we came on air, I do work with couples. It's just one part of what I do. I couldn't have given a toss about working with couples, not because it's not important, but it wasn't something I ever imagined I would do. I didn't think I was arrogant enough to think that I was in such an amazing relationship and such a good husband and partner that I even had the right to run a couples retreat. But we kept being asked and asked and asked. And finally, I needed a why that was bigger than myself and the clients asking me. And that was children. I only work with couples because I care about their kids. And these are kids I haven't even met. They're the byproduct of all this beautiful work. They're the byproduct of the questions we're unwilling, unable, or don't have the time to ask. They're the byproduct and the beneficiaries of the work that most couples, particularly entrepreneurial couples that are busy growing businesses, don't want to do. And I'll give you one little stat. Couples wait 5 years too late to work on the relationship. And what is sometimes a hairline crack, something that's so insignificant, like leaving your socks on the ground or leaving the dishwasher open or not putting the dishes in the dishwasher, can become the Grand Canyon over 5 years if it's not addressed. And I think it's the same principle when it comes to an entrepreneur trying to build a business. If they don't work on themselves, if they're not willing to ask the questions now that they don't even know they need to ask. What's the gap between you and yourself? Your relationship to yourself as a leader, your dysfunctionality from your ability to lead, your dysfunctionality, your disconnection from your ambition, and or your family, and fill in the blanks. So yeah, maybe I'll just leave it there. I could just keep rambling. Or
No, there's none of it rambling. It's there's chills going up the back of my neck. It's your work, that reference to couples work, which you're hugely passionate about, not for the couples themselves, but for the children. And that's analogous to our program. We're hugely passionate about the teams that the leaders lead, the organizations that the leaders lead. The leaders are just a Trojan horse for us to get to the teams unlocking their potential and the organization increasing its probability, its likelihood of scaling. But the organization, the team and the organization are really just expressions of the leader. So we need to unlock the leader's giftedness. Now, in everything you've said, and it's bringing me back to some of the kind of the old sayings that I grew up with. I grew up in mom and dad, brilliant people, your classic Irish household. You headed to mass, you did the middle of 5 kids. I would say a very nourishing upbringing, holiday in the west of Ireland once a year. And so I would say that I don't have any trauma versus someone who, for yourself, your last talk, and I would encourage everybody to go and read Philip's last talk. It's hugely emotional. You were berated in school for your because people didn't ask the question. Maybe Philip has dyslexia, but instead you were mocked as being stupid, lazy, careless, and that to me is like a big T trauma. Is there a scale, or is it all relative? And what are the things I'm thinking of myself when we go through this? What are the things I need to, and other leaders need to watch out if they haven't experienced big T trauma?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Wow. Okay. This is so good. The questions, the thoughtfulness that you put into this, I appreciate, and the honesty. There's just so many directions I can go. Number one, in no particular order, one of the great tragedies in the world is that we compare ourselves or our tragedies next to somebody else's. One of the great tragedies is that we compare our successes next to others. Now, when we use other people's success as a leverage point for inspiration, that's different. But when some of your clients are stifled by the fact that they live in the smallest house, or they're not scaling at the same rate, or they even feel inadequate before they sign up to your program because they think, hey, if the guys know the truth that I'm only scaling at X amount, do I really belong, etc. So we compare ourselves both positively and negatively, and dysfunctionality that runs through all that and permeates all of that stuff. Here's my view, and some people are going to like this and some people are going to hate this, and it really depends on their journey around trauma. We have some classic high-level societal traumas that are kind of almost stamped with societal improvement and going, oh, well, that's trauma, sexual abuse, physical abuse, whatever it happens to be. And then we have other ones that kind of go below the radar, that they're not physical, so therefore they're not as damaging. In my personal experience, the circumstances in which the trauma exists can differ. The pain itself is identical. The pain itself is identical. There is no difference than my client John, who was beaten up by his father, and Mary, who wasn't beaten up by her father, but her father was a workaholic, was never home, didn't pick her up, didn't love her, didn't hug her, isolated her, felt like she wasn't good enough, that he really wanted a son. She created either those narratives that are not true because of the lack of intimacy, or the father implied that one way or the other. The lostness, the loneliness, the unwantedness, the pain is exactly the same. The circumstances and society would say to us that they should be different when they're not. I've never seen a differential in terms of pain, okay, ever. That's the next part of this. Building on from that, and I say this with love and respect, I'm not knocking you personally, but I would suggest to anyone who says to me, I don't have any trauma, that is with respect not true. I don't know if it's possible. I don't feel it is possible to go through life and not be traumatized at some level. It just may not be in a way that you imagine. And I'm going to give you a real life example. There's a gentleman, a business owner from Canada, who decided for his 60th birthday, he would gift himself a week on the west coast of Ireland with me. And he came to an event called Brave Soul. And it's heavy lifting. It's not your kind of typical birthday party thing where some people might go and play golf, other people might go to a spa, other people might go to the Amalfi Coast. This guy came to the west of Ireland, and as you and I both know, it's beautiful. But the work we do here on some of the programs is deep and rich. And what this man discovered, I think this is the perfect story for this question, this invitation that you've so brilliantly and kindly given me. This man arrived in, and he was kind of happy-go-lucky. That had become his, everything's wonderful, everything's awesome. And that's great. And after about 2 or 3 days, he came to me and he said, Philip, he said, listen, some people are discovering simple things that they never imagined affected them as children. And they're now, as we move through the week, we begin to help them understand how those things therefore show up as a leader today and get in the way of and inhibit their ability to execute, make decisions, take risks, et cetera, to think big, to be ambitious, for example. And he says, I'm seeing this, and it's making so much sense, but I didn't have any trauma as a child, like nothing. And I went, okay. And he expected me to give him some incredible answer or some big insight or rip his heart open and find something that didn't exist or whatever, right? And I didn't chase him down. And then people were kind of making fun of him in the most beautiful way, because he was, oh, here's Mr. Happy. And he came up to me in the bar, and the odd time we would go for a beer. And if I have a beer in my hand, which is very rare if I'm working, but if I have a beer in my hand, we just don't do any work. We just will not have the conversations. But he comes up to me, he goes, Philip, just quickly, he says, but I don't think there's anything there. And I said, can I offer you something? He goes, yeah. I said, why don't you just set your story that you've been holding on to aside for a moment? Don't throw it out the window and burn it and say it's bullshit, but just say, what if it's not entirely true? And just sit with that tonight and take out a piece of paper, take out your journal. What if it's not entirely true? What if that's not the entire story? Or what if that version isn't exactly as I remember it? And he came in the following morning, I'll never forget it. And before our bums hit the seat, he had his hand up, almost like he was in school. People don't put their hands up in my room. And I looked at him and I said, Scott, you want to say something? He goes, yeah. He goes, you remember the story I told at the beginning of the week that I was independent, I brought up in this incredible background. I didn't want for anything. I was the first kid in my area to get a bike, and I used to go off on these big, long bike rides, and everyone's going, yeah, we remember that story. He goes, I wasn't independent. I was lonely. I used to spend hours on my own on my bike because I didn't have friends. I used to spend hours disappearing off into nature because my parents didn't want to hang out with me. I didn't stay at home because my dad wasn't around. And he said, not just that, but I see how I actually do that as a leader today. I say I have an open door policy, but only unless someone walks in the door and tells me what I want to hear, do I welcome them in my door. I don't let people truly in, and I create all these boundaries. And what it does, it has limited the ability for our business to grow, but most importantly for us to connect as an organization, which in turn is affecting their ability to grow. 60 years old, He came all the way to Ireland for his birthday. And he sat, when he made that realization, he just sat numb and cried. And some people might sit there or listen to this or watch this in the future and go, but what's the purpose? But if he didn't know, would he not just be better off not knowing? And I go, well, for some of you that you might believe that. And if that's the case, good luck with that thought process. And some of you go, that works really hard. And I go, no. The work I do is so simple. It's not hard at all. What's hard is living with the unknown. What's hard is living with a boundary and a wall around your body, around your heart, around your soul, and not even knowing you're doing it. So your kids grow up and go, yeah, my dad is a lovely man. I mean, I think he loved me. He never let me in. He came to my soccer games where he was absent, just wasn't present. He never shared emotion. He never shared vulnerability. So as a result, as a man or a woman now, I don't do it either because that's what I modeled. It transformed, I was going to say everything. That's just such a cliche bullshit line. It transformed his ability to connect as a human being and translate it into his business when he went home.
Wow.
That's what I would say to anybody who says, I don't have trauma. And I say that with so much love and respect. I don't get brownie points if I help somebody see something they didn't see before. But when they bring that into their lives, the practicalities of that, and they bring it home, and their loved one sees it. Do you know some of the referrals that we get? I never saw this coming. Now, I never saw this coming. We have husbands and wives call our office and can I come to whatever program, and say, how'd you hear about it? My husband was there, and this is something I never imagined would happen. And we say, so what is it about your husband? So I just want a piece of what I see them coming home with, and sustainably coming home with. When you get in touch with a truth, it's very hard to unsee it. I have no interest in riling people up so they go out the door beating their chest on a Monday morning going, oh my God, our world has changed. That motivation, to me, that kind of motivation doesn't work. I want to help people get to see the truth of where they've come from, where they are right now, and what's possible for the future. When you see that, you can't unsee it. And something shifts inside of us that is just so non-mechanical. It's spiritual, it's energetic, it's emotion, what we call soul set, and it just lights you up. So I'll maybe just finish there.
So powerful, Philip. I'm a little bit numb myself. The essence of One Last Talk, we haven't explicitly shared with our listeners what One Last Talk actually is. Can you do that, Philip, and why you feel, which Tucker Max so eloquently did. This is a guy who had therapy for years and praises this quite simple concept, this simple process to unlocking something that he hadn't previously been able to do, having spent years and years and years. In fact, he cites 4 days a week seeing a therapist. So share with our listeners what One Last Talk actually is.
Yeah, I guess it's one expression, one way in which we hope that people can access something inside themselves. We believe one of the most powerful things we have is not just story, as one of the most, particularly in Ireland, as an oral tradition of passing down wisdom and information and knowledge and so on and so forth. It is and will continue to be, as long as humans walk this earth, I believe, the most powerful way in which we can communicate, not just to the world, but to ourselves. And I also believe the most powerful story in the world is our own, but so many of us don't believe that. I mean, how many leaders have I met? How many leaders have you met that say, oh my God, you've got an incredible story? And they go, oh yeah, whatever. Or their story is limited to their success on the ice. And to me, we're way more than that. I mean, I have a player who's just broken into the Premier League in England, and people think, oh my God, when are you going to leverage that and use that all over your social media? I don't really talk about it because I haven't asked him. We haven't had that conversation. I'm just proud of him. But that's not who this man is. This man is so much more. He's humble. He's down to earth. He's family conscious and everything else. To me, I wanted to come up with a way in which, slightly based out of frustration, I would go to conferences around the world. I've been very fortunate to be able to speak in many of them in front of thousands and thousands of people. I mean, nuts. I mean, auditoriums, stadiums, and the crazy stuff. I never imagined, as a dyslexic kid who never wanted to be seen, who just wanted to look at the ground and never be seen, that I'd be standing in these places with these speakers. And this might sound very unprofessional, but it is my truth. It is my experience. And I would go to the green rooms and I would go to these breakout rooms. You'd meet these speakers that at one point I kind of wondered, would I ever even match up to these people? And the disconnection between who they are on stage and who they are in real life was enormous. Like, just enormous. And how they would act when they went out in the night and the evenings and everything else. I mean, everyone's entitled to let your hair down and do whatever the hell you want, but they'd preach one thing and then they'd do another thing and they'd be another thing. And I just felt this disconnection. And then I realized that, you know, you'd go to audiences and people be taking selfies and asking for autograph. I mean, it's just bananas. I refuse to sign books. I just don't want to sign a book. I don't judge anybody that signs books. That was my little military way of pulling back. And I said to myself, there are a lot of wonderful speakers. There are some incredible, wise people in the world standing on stages, but there's also a lot of shysters who basically have nothing to offer other than selling shit that people don't need or want. And I just said, what if we create an event where 95% of the speakers were the audience? And I'll come back to this very quickly. I want to circle back, if we have time, to ambition, because it was such a big stat that you put out, and I want to talk a bit about that. When I was contemplating One Last Talk, I visualized a lady, and don't ask me why. I visualized a lady in Yellowknife. Yellowknife is a town in northern Canada that I've never been to, and I even gave her name. I think her name was Betty. I think that was the original, and people might call it an avatar. To me, it's just a lot more simple than that. I just energetically connected. And Betty has a story. She's got some trauma. She's got some pain. No one knows about it. She's never talked about it. She's too embarrassed. She's too ashamed. She's buried it so deeply. She doesn't think it affects her. And Betty goes online one day and hears a One Last Talk from Sarah or John in Denmark or Adelaide, Australia. And she gets lit up because she hears a truth and a vulnerability in a story that relates to her own. And she goes, oh my God, this matters. Oh my God, what if my story matters? What if I take the box that I buried under the ground, take it out, unlock it, take out my story? What if I share it with myself and one other human being on this earth? If their story matters, maybe my story will. And I'm going to share this story to one other human being, my truth. Because that's what a One Last Talk is. It's your truth. It's not what you think Donald Trump should do. It's not about what you think Northern Ireland, the political landscape, needs to be. It's not about the education system. It's not about global warming. It's a part of your individual truth. And if she believes her story matters, Betty, sitting in Yellowknife for the first time, perhaps in her 45, 85 years on this planet, will believe she matters. That's why One Last Talk exists. If you don't have something of why, if you don't have something more meaningful, ambition will elude you. It will run out. Ambition is like at best a Duracell battery, which we think lasts longer than most batteries. Ambition will run out unless you connect it to a why that is so fucking deeper and wider and bigger than you. Ambition will run out. It's temporary.
I want to connect back to ambition because you brought that up. The second principle of our 10 principle scale X framework is purpose and vision, and psyche is the first principle. I think it's the confluence in your language of soul set and mindset. And I want to come to that as well. How do I start, or how does anyone start? I feel like, you know, I'm being coached, which is wonderful, and I hope this is helpful for the listeners. Let's say, you know, I'm that 60-year-old entrepreneur. I've no trauma here. There's nothing going on. In preparedness for arriving at one of your workshops, let's say,
Yeah.
how do I begin to excavate what my truth actually is if it's not obvious? I'm not dyslexic. I haven't, witnessed or suffered abuse. Thank goodness. I haven't, okay, grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, but in the confines of a loving home. How do you begin to start excavating and going deeper if it's not obvious? If it's not an obvious big T that you've been hiding, that you're too embarrassed to share, but if you're that gentleman who, for the listeners who, and we'll share your contact details after this, Philip, and the details of your workshops, which sound incredible. But for those who are, can't access what you're doing, how do they start preparing for this themselves to go deeper?
So the reason that we build the retreats that we do, and there's lots of other modalities and different things in the world, at the very basic level, therapy is a thing that I think all of us should be doing. But our retreats are based on the premise that you don't need to excavate at all in advance of coming to our work. Our work is designed that the excavation, the examining, the gentleness, the way in which it's done is it meets people where they're at and gives them a little bit of a nudge. But I'm going to share something that doesn't answer. It's not that I'm avoiding, but I deeply appreciate the fact that you're trying to, for your audience and for yourself, is just say, okay, so let's bring it back to practicalities, Philip. How do I, give me a question, give me a sequence. I get it. I absolutely and utterly get it. But I appreciate the gentleness. You're not forcing it, because I sometimes go to podcasts and I go, yeah, no, but hang on, I need the 4 steps. And this, the 4-step process when it comes to marketing, and the 4-step process or 20-step process when it comes to sales, operationals, whatever. I get it. When it comes to emotion, when it comes to soul set, when it comes to relationships, one of the downsides of entrepreneurs that are very successful is they try to bring the same methodology of how they run their business into their personal lives. And we all know how that goes.
Guilty.
And it just explodes. And one of the classics with men is they send their wife a Google link of the 10-step process to be happy, or they buy them a book that they don't want. And then when their wife goes nuts and they go, but I don't want this, I never asked for this, they do this line, they use this line, which is infuriating for most women, is that, but honey, I just want you to be happy, which is my way of saying, I'm off the hook. My sincerity was, no, what's actually going on is, you were attracted to that person 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago because in some way, shape, or form, they were different to you. They were better looking than you. They were funnier. They were more gregarious. They were more intimate. They were more sensitive. And now you're spending the next 10, 15 years trying to change that person to see the world like you do, which is called control. And that's why it never works out. So going back to your actual question, one of the things, so if I take that gentleman, Scott, and I say, where did the magic for him start? Was it in the pub? Now, my ego wants to say, oh, no, the magic started when he came into contact with Philip McKernan. The minute we got eye contact, the magician was there and the student was ready and all that other horseshit, right? The magic happened when he went online and looked at our website. Because just before that, he was done. He had a curiosity that he'd been carrying for many years. But what if there's something I just can't access? To me, the worst case scenario, and you asked about, accessing our work, so I'll speak about our work. The worst case scenario, and we've never had this. To this date, we have never had this. The worst case scenario is someone comes to the west coast of Ireland, spends 4 or 5 days in a castle, overlooking down on this beautiful ocean that's right out in front of me here, spending time in a local village, listening to incredible music, asking beautiful questions of oneself, journeying, exposure, listening to great stories of those who want to share, who are open to sharing. The worst thing you can do is go back and go, yeah, didn't learn anything, knew it all. We have never had that in my 20 plus years doing this work. So we don't know. I know that's kind of an annoying statement. What started for that man, Scott, was courage. We're obsessed with clarity. We need and want, desperately need clarity. Clarity is a byproduct of one thing, and it's called courage. The courage to examine, the courage to question. You sit down with your wife tomorrow morning for a cup of coffee. Honey, how do you think we're doing on a scale of 1 to 10? And she'd go, you know what? You're doing brilliant, John. I think we're like, as a relationship, we're a 9.5. John, what do you think? Sarah, I'm thinking 10 plus. I think we're 10 plus. I mean, we had that deep conversation yesterday. We had this, we have that. We navigated that conversation with our daughter beautifully. We're eating nutritionally better. We're both going to a personal trainer. And we don't watch TV anymore. We're not watching the news, and et cetera, et cetera. The courage comes when both of them look at each other and go, what if we're wrong? What if we're basing our happiness on the past? What if we're basing our happiness on every relationship, functional and dysfunctional, we've had up to this date? What if our benchmark is what we witness in society? What if our benchmark is the couple down the road that we know are unhappy, and all we keep saying is, well, we're happier than them? Is that the benchmark that your clients want? Is that the benchmark that we want as our lives? Happier than them? Happier than we think we can be? Or are we willing to run the risk, which is zero risk in my personal opinion, of saying, hey, what if there's another 20 or 30% that now we can squeeze out of life, that we can bring and invite into life? What if there's that curiosity? Now that to me is exciting, my work or otherwise.
Yeah, and so powerful, because ultimately when those leaders squeeze that extra 20 to 30% out, the impact that has on their partners, their closest partners, their children, is enormous. On their team, it's considerable. On their organization, it's huge. On their communities, it's significant. Society and economy at large.
I made one very quick thing I want to add. I had a guy on a call 2 days ago. Now, obviously, I won't use any names. And he's heading in what looks like he's heading into his third marriage. Incredibly successful man in business. He's one of those guys that it appears, not quite true, that everything he touches turns to gold. And as we got into the conversation, it was very surface level. And as he got more and more comfortable with me, it was a one-off call. We got deeper and deeper and deeper. And I said, you don't really like yourself, do you? And he said, how in God's name do you assess that from our conversation? I said, it's just really little tiny subtleties, listening to language, energy. It's just a feeling. And he goes, yeah, I don't. And he says, I was going to give you the bullshit line why I married my second wife. Do you know why I married her? And I said, why? He said, because she remembered my birthday one day. And he said, I had such an abusive relationship with my dad. I didn't feel like anyone cared about me. And when this woman rang me and said, happy birthday, and he nearly fell off his seat and said, how did you remember? She says, well, I remembered your birthday. He just thought, so what a lot of us do is we're still spending time on this earth trying to live up to the life that we didn't have as a child. When you go to a football game and every parent is on the sideline looking at their iPhone, and the kid scores and they run up, did you see me, daddy? Did you see me? Did you see me, daddy? Did you see me, daddy? We're still trying to do that. I know entrepreneurs that have built entire empires because they still have this inner child saying to them, daddy, will you see me now? Will you see me now, daddy? Will you see me now? Mommy, I'm here. Mommy. And I know that sounds freaky and weird and odd, and some people will just want to slam the mic off or whatever when they hear this, but because it may actually weirdly touch something inside of you that you haven't recognized. And if you cannot do this work for yourself, and I'm going to say something that's really bold, but I believe it to my core, is that if we bring children into this world, in fact, if we go out into this world and hang out with other people, we have a moral obligation to work on our story. Because regardless of whether we think we're passing it on to the next generation, when we think we're not, we're actually putting it into the most beautiful box. We're putting a beautiful packaging around it. We're putting a beautiful cap on it, and we're putting it in a beautiful bow, and we're handing it to the next generation, because they may not viscerally know and feel it, but they know it. Because the greatest audience on earth, if any of your clients want to become speakers or aspire to share a message, go and speak in a high school. I've spoken in high schools all over Ireland many years ago. The toughest audience in the world, because you cannot bullshit them.
So true. Something you've said there is so profound. And we describe this persona as the shadow leader, and it's the second generation leader. the leader who has been handed the designation, the title managing director, but they're still operating or trying to operate under the shadow of a really strong founder. And I come up against this all of the time, where it's exactly that. The second generation leader is screaming to prove to daddy that they can do it. Daddy won't let them, has given them the designation. They're caught in this hollow trap of feeling obligated to daddy to live out daddy's dream. And it typically is daddy. It's typically a male founder, and it's typically a son. The founder's still operating in the shadows of the business, but the business is always looking, everyone in the business is always looking at daddy. Daddy saying, well, he's saying, I've let the reins go, I've handed it across to my son. The reality is they're still there. They're calling the shots. The son is desperately craving to be empowered to receive that encouragement, support, that simple line from the dad: you are enough, and you have my back, son, and what you're doing is wonderful. Maintain our values, but go and craft your own version of the next chapter of my success. Craft your own vision, ensure that your purpose is your own purpose. But what I'd like you to do is maintain the values. And you've this dynamic that goes on in family businesses, which is why so very few are successful, into the second generation, and very, very few are successful into third generation, because ultimately you get this implosion of untold stories, if to use your language, of unaddressed stories. So that speaks loudly to what we see every day, Philip, in terms of the kid screaming for acknowledgement and appreciation. And I see it in the boardrooms of family businesses.
I work with a number of clients, and I've worked with a number of clients helping them navigate that landscape. And I've been fortunate to be brought into some environments where I'm able to have the conversation on both sides of that equation, both the father figure and the son, and in some cases the daughter coming up through the business. And those narratives they run so much deeper. They run so much deeper. You've got the father who is holding on by the skin of their teeth because they want to remain, significant. You've got the son or daughter that's about to explode and wants to blow up the business, not because they want to change it, but they want to put their stamp on it, and so on and so on. I mean, I've been there, but there's an unpackingness that needs to happen around the dynamic with the parent before they start to see the clarity and the reality of the landscape that they're currently in. And inevitably, it requires a series of conversations that most upcoming new generation are unwilling to have. They don't even know they need to have it. There's an uncomfortableness. There's a stepping in. They've played a victim role, and there's a power dynamic going on that they're just unwilling and unable to break. They are able, they're just unwilling to break it. Until they can see that, nothing changes.
We could have a podcast on that alone.
Absolutely.
Couple of things I want to address before we wrap up. The time is flying. I'm loving this conversation. Firstly is that confluence of, you've mentioned soul set a number of times. You have a wonderful line: success is manufactured in the mind, while happiness is cultivated in the soul. Can you share with our listeners what that means? Because I feel it speaks to psyche, but you have described it much more eloquently and much more beautifully than we have.
Yeah, well, I think, the way I probably just describe it in the context of business or work is, there's mind work. There's work that society has told you you're good at. You've studied for, or whatever, that you're rewarded for. And I'm going to use an accountant. They always get a hard rap, but my wife's an accountant, and this is a traditional case for her. Definitely a legitimate case for her. She was good at numbers. She grew up in poverty. She wanted to get out of the countryside. her career guidance person indicated maybe accounting. Her sister was an accountant. She went on and studied accountant, became an accountant, made decent money, and the rest is history. And happily ever after, except it's not. Then there is what I call the heart work, where you basically do something that really doesn't bring you hugely alive. Maybe it's a solid business, maybe you have a good team around you, and you basically bring that work out into the world, and it's profitable. So you cut off 10% of the profits and you give that back to charities, and you basically use this as a vehicle for good. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with mind work. There's nothing wrong with heart work. But then there's soul work, and there's soul work that basically you find something, you unearth, you uncover. You don't find, actually. Let me retract that word, because it often kind of leads people to think that you need to go out and find it. It's behind a bush in Australia, or it's at the bottom of the ocean in the Atlantic. It's somewhere outside of ourselves. So we need to unearth that. What is that artistry inside of us? What is that why? What is that narrative? What is that pain that we want to write for humanity, because we ourselves know it intimately? And that is what I call soul work. We don't have to turn that into a business necessarily. We can scale that if we want to, but it's something that we need to honor at some point. And to me, the deeper we go in that journey, from the mind, to the heart work, to the soul work, the deeper we go in that, the deeper we experience life, the deeper we feel alive, and the more aliveness we breathe into the world. I'm speaking at a conference next month in Orlando, and one of my opening lines, I'm going to start with a story, a very specific story. And one of my opening lines directly after that is, the world does not need another real estate investor, period. Now, on that merit alone, I probably will never be invited back. In fact, if the organizer hears this now, I probably won't, they'll retract my invitation to speak in front of thousands of people. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to build from that. And I want to share a quick nuance. I was invited to a prison many years ago as a volunteer to work with these inmates who are assimilating, who are working through the things that they've done in society, and forgiving and everything else. And I'll just share this very quickly. But we were on these panels of entrepreneurs where the inmate would come having rehabilitated from a forgiveness and working on themselves, and working through a lot of why they are the way they are and have become the way they've become. And they basically get to pitch this business, and then they get through to the next round, and there's about 150 inmates, and they get to the final and they can pitch, and these get support if they ever get out of prison to bring these businesses to life. And this young man comes up and he pitches a business, and the other three entrepreneurs were very kind to him and said, "Oh my God, it's a great pitch." And it was opening up a gym, and 3 gyms over 10 years or whatever. And I said, "Great, another gym." And he looks at me and goes, "Excuse me?" I said, "Another gym, great, fantastic. Oh my God, I'm so enamored. I've got goosebumps all over." And I was being really sarcastic. And he goes, "You don't like the idea?" I said, "No, the idea is fine. I just don't know why." But my inclination was he had a why. And he goes, "Well, the why is not important." And I said, "Important to who?" And he says, "Well, it's important to me, but it's not important to others." And I said, "Well, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not going to vote for you because I get no substance behind this." And he goes, "My grandmother died of obesity." And as he started to tremble and the tears emerged in his eyes, he said, "No one should lose their grandmother. It was the only person he had in his life who loved him and believed in him and had his back. No one should lose their grandmother at the age that I did for obesity, and I want to write that." And the next minute, the 3 entrepreneurs stare at me as if I don't know if they were just shocked. And his tears were coming. I'm crying. The 3 entrepreneurs are crying. I said, "If you don't bring that into the story, into your pitch, you're a fucking idiot." Excuse my language. And he brought it into his pitch. He made it all the way to the final. There was 4 really well-known entrepreneurs who were on the final panel. They voted him as the winner. And when they were interviewed, every one of the panelists said, "Why did you vote for him?" Unanimously. The other 3 didn't get a look in. They said he was the only one with the compelling why. So I'm circling back around to this idea, which we kind of almost touched on at the beginning. If there's waning ambition, the why is not deep enough. It's just not. It's not deep enough. And I say deep enough, not deep enough in societal terms. It's not connected enough to our individual narrative and story and experience in this world. That's what I mean by depth.
Yeah, I love the language and the depth of your insight in the context of purpose. You know, we talk about purpose being the energy which motivates and drives you towards the vision that you've crafted, but actually you've given it you've expressed it much more eloquently, and given it so much more meaning than I have previously articulated. What we say is ultimately, on that rainy day in November, when in Ireland, when the rain is battering you side roads and you're off to a client meeting and you're wondering why the hell you've had an argument with the kids in the morning, the wife has stirred at you going out the door and you're wondering, why the hell am I doing this? If you can't answer that question, then ultimately you will not have the energy to navigate lots of those rainy days in November, which you're going to encounter on your scaling journey, which is why we compel people to do the work to unearth their why. But you've just given them a beautiful story to reinforce why your why is so critically important. And I think this is also challenging, going back to second generation leaders, because they almost feel obligated to inherit the founder's why without actually doing the work to discover their own, which is where this unravels itself.
Yeah, I mean, I said to a soccer player once, I said, "Why do you play the game?" And he goes, "What?" Because I love it. I go, "Nah, don't buy that." And the truth is, behind that statement is I wasn't sure if I bought it or not, but my job is to test it. And he goes, "Well, I really like it." And I go, "Oh, so we've just gone from that potent word and provocative word called love to like in a matter of like 4 or 5 seconds. I wonder if we spend another 20 minutes, are we going to go to hate? So why are you playing football?" And he finally says, "Well, I thought I loved it, and I thought I was doing it for this reason, and I said, well, we don't have the luxury of thinking this is why you're doing it. So you can reinvent a why. You can detach from somebody else's why and reattach to a why in a heartbeat. But you've got to detach. I mean, particularly in that dynamic between a founder that's unwilling to let go and a young person that's unwilling to ask them to let go or wants them to let go. And to some extent, by the way, there's something we haven't necessarily touched on, is there's possibly a part of them that's scared shitless if their parent lets go, because if the business succeeds, maybe it's because of the father. And if it doesn't succeed, they can blame the father, his old ways or whatever. But what happens if they move away and this business falls apart? And there's probably a tremendous amount of fear. So business owners will bitch and gripe about the fact that the father won't let go and relinquish control. But in some weird way, deep down, it supports an insecurity or a limiting belief that they're not good enough to run the organization and make it effective. So there's a lot of nuances and dynamics. And I remember one guy came back to me and he says, I have my why. It's been there. I just never named it before. And you could just see it in his face. Somebody had taken a veil. They just done something to him. And he was just standing that quarter of a centimeter taller. His chest was out another quarter of a centimeter wider. And he just stood with an ownership. And from that day forth, he just played football for him and for a greater cause around what impact he can make. So he chose to play football for him for the first time in his life.
Stood with ownership. I mean, that's what we want from all of our leaders, to stand with ownership. And to go back, just to bring that back, what we're appealing to people to do is to really do the work to unlock your giftedness. And, I'm kind of coming back, kind of gravitating back to the family dynamic. And it's recognizing that actually both can play a significant role. The founder and the second generation leader both can play a significant role if they take the step to unearth their giftedness, to have the difficult conversation around, well, look, what am I good at? What value do you think I bring to this business right now? Because I found it, and there was one stage I did everything, and I kind of think that I'm good at everything, and maybe I am good at most things, but actually, what are those things that I am good at, but actually are really impeding progress now because I'm still involved in them? And what are the things that I'm exceptionally brilliant? It's my unique ability, it's my giftedness that I can continue to contribute to this business and add value for the greater good of our customers. If people are willing to ask that question of 2, 3, 4, 5 of those around them, that will reveal a truth, which again, if they're honest to say, okay, well, I'll stay out of all of these bits, I'll focus on these bits in the interest of, you know, the team, the organization, and our customers. And that's why I think, you know, even the 360, which is a tool, is wonderfully powerful, because also I find our giftedness is something we often don't recognize because it comes easy to us. And we've got this old paradigm that work must be by its very nature hard and a bit of a grind. And when we find that thing and do that thing that is our gift, it's not a grind. But we don't value it because it's not a grind, and we feel that in order to actually deliver value to somebody, we should have felt it was a grind to get to there. So I think it's a whole other conversation. I have a closing tradition, Philip, and I pose this question to all of our guests. Can you share or provide 3 timeless takeaways?
Yeah, I wrote some different random things down here in a piece of paper, so I'm going to glance down and see. I'm not sure they're timeless, but in many respects, as I look at them, I think they absolutely are timeless. Spend time alone. Something we haven't talked about. And people, oh, meditate. No. Yoga. No. Movies. No. Just go and spend one night away, at the very least, once a quarter on your own. And people go to strategize, to write, to come up with ideas. And I go, some of those may emerge, but the whole idea is to go away once a quarter for one night to a very simple location with as least distractions as possible, to develop a relationship with yourself and to sit with the uncomfortableness. And that's another insight. If you have a founder or a friend, or it's yourself, anyone who's listening in the future, and you go, yeah, I have no traumas, no issues in my life. Now, I don't ever spend time on my own, like really, really spend time on my own, like truly choose to spend time on my own. In fact, I can't even get in the car without the radio. What that tells you is there's an uncomfortableness and a disconnection between your relationship to yourself. And to me, that's the most important relationship in the world, not to sound disrespectful to any of the people who listen who are have a religion that they believe wholeheartedly in. So spend time alone, and one night a quarter is the optimum, in my personal opinion. But start slow. Be absolutely relentless and unapologetic in your pursuit to uncover your soul's work. Everybody has a work that is aligned to the essence of who we are, and that's what I refer to as soul, like the essence. And that work is there. It does not mean you need to sell your business. It does not need you need to give it away to management. But don't stay so busy that your soul work is you never get to it. And one of the reasons we stay so busy and we don't want to uncover our soul's work, even though we say verbally we do, is that none of us want to run the risk of failing at the essence of who we are. So we'd rather avoid it and stay away from it. And to me, the world doesn't need that. The world needs more people in line with their soul's work. So to me, just keep going after that no matter what. And I had a third one, and it's kind of eluded me. I would say, based on the conversation, is mine. And I say mine, I don't mean hard work, digging and blowing and dynamite and all that, but gently mine your story. Because your past holds so much of the future. I have a saying and a statement or a quote: the past has created the present, and the present is creating the future. So everything you are today is because of the past in some shape or form, and therefore everything in the future is based on your decisions and your indecisions today. Go back and understand your past. Do it in a supportive way, not because this is work we do. I would recommend that to anybody. Do it in a supportive environment, and do it with somebody that you trust. You do it with somebody that can help you not just understand your past, but see how it's playing out today, because it is driving so much of your narrative, most of which you're not even aware of. So mining our stories is one of the most underrated things that we can do as grown adults, as a leader, as a husband, as a father, as a parent. And that's what I'd leave people with.
Wow. I know you're deep in a wonderful personal project at the moment to develop and bring to life an old castle in the west coast of Ireland. What's next for you? Is it finally completing that project? What are you writing anymore? Are you focused on delivering your programs? What are you up to?
Well, what we're in the middle of right now is coming to the, I was going to say the end, and it is the end of a 3-year restoration project, of a truly, I mean, it's modest in terms of size, but in terms of stature and depth and energy, there's something about the land that we are now stewards of. There's 22 acres of woodland, 500-year-old castle. There's just something in the land, and it's indescribable. And we did not buy it as an investment. Trust me, there's better investments in the world. We bought it and we leaned into it because we were drawn to it and called to it. The story is relatively long, so I won't go there now. What the next phase is to invite people to come from all over the world, to come and not just experience the castle, but to experience the work, but more importantly, to truly experience themselves in a way that they've never done before. If that doesn't happen, we're kind of screwed because we put so much energy and so much time into the castle. But it's not like we're opening up a coffee shop that we need to sell coffee. We trust and hope most days. Some days I wake up with fear that we've always had a very strong body of work. I think we're skilled in terms of creating the space for people. We never had a home for the work, and nor did I feel we needed one necessarily, but one came along and we just had to jump at it. So now we've created a very spiritual sanctuary for people to come from all over the world to heal, grow as individuals, and go back out and lead in a way that perhaps they just didn't even know was possible. And that to me then creates a ripple effect bigger and wider than any of the work that we can do. So what's next is creating really special events for people to come in, and really intimate events, like 16 people, 18 people is our new, we're reducing all our numbers, and to strategically align with people who have audiences who get our work. We're not looking to make money necessarily, but they're saying, hey, I believe in your work, why don't we collaborate together? I'll bring some of my clients in, you do your magic, we'll come together as an organization. And I was, that's something that's exciting, to work with people who get the work and who are willing to roll up the sleeves and expose this to their clients as well.
Well, I'm so glad our mutual friend, thousands of miles away, connected with us 90 miles away. Your work is incredible, Philip. I want to thank you for the depth of thought in your responses today, for your incredible energy, for your honesty. I need to go and lie down. This has been a really, really incredible conversation for me, because you have given it so much. So I want to thank you for that, and I continue to wish you every success in the wonderful work that you're doing. I'm looking forward to keeping in touch. If people want to connect with you and find out more about your wonderful work, Philip, where best to reach you?
PhilipMcKernan.com is probably the simplest way to come across our work, or onelasttalk.com. But I want to just say something very quickly, if I may, and that is, I often say the work is only as good as the people that come. I'm not some, magician that can pull rabbits out of a hat. That when people come in the right energy and the right openness and courage, and even if there's a sliver out there, we can work with that, then the work becomes truly magic. And I would say, if there's been value today and there's been moments where there's insight coming, it's coming through me, not from me. And you have facilitated that. Your questions, your thoughtfulness, your care, the sincerity, your desire to make an impact is palpable. And I do a lot of interviews, and it's with respect, it's not always there. So whatever, if there's any wisdom has come, it's because you've created the space for it to flow. And I just want to acknowledge that in you, and I really appreciate that.
Oh, I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks so much. Philip, I wish you every success. Thanks once again for your time, energy, incredible wisdom. Take care.
Thank you. Cheers.